What if I told you Bad Boy Records was never about rap music? That it was another corporate front like Purdue Pharma, Theranos, Enron. Just another way for people to behave badly and exploit others, this time covered in Versace and Boev and Ciroc. We can have our opinions about Bad Boy Records and the brilliant artists that came out of that stable. Biggie Smalls, of course, Mace, Lil Kim, Faith Evans, but really let's look at Bad Boy Records as what it's become, which is as a criminal enterprise. That is not unique to P. Diddy, Sean Diddy Combs, or any other person in the rap industry, because Bad Boy Records is America in a nutshell. Bad Boy Records exists as a product of American narcissism and is the outcome of what happens when people are given unlimited power. This isn't about Black culture. This isn't about any type of racial components. It's about true America. Bad Boy Records as a reflection, a mirror of the American experiment and its narcissism, which is inherent in the system. The point to Bad Boy Records wasn't to create great music. It was to make money and to make P. Diddy, Sean Diddy Combs rich. That's why he was dancing in videos. That's why he was doing what he did in the 90s to make sure that his artists were being promoted and elevated in ways that would maximize his profitability. And so now we see that he got in trouble with the law, was brought to trial, was found not guilty of several major charges, including the major racketeering charge, but was found guilty of the lesser charges of transporting people across state lines for the purpose of engaging in sexual acts, essentially trafficking them. That is a violation of the Mann Act, which was implemented in 1910 as a white anti-slavery act. That was the law used against people who fell into sexual crimes, R. Kelly being one of the most recent examples of how the Mann Act has been used, but it's also being used against Ghislaine Maxwell. And it was what the prosecution was ready to charge Jeffrey Epstein with before his outcome was determined. So today's verdict isn't something that should be celebrated. It shouldn't be something that anyone should look at and say, oh, look, we should be completely happy and joyous on any side, because it's not something that his family or his supporters should look at as, yes, this was a win. And it's not something that his haters and people on the opposite side should say as, oh, see, I told you, this is just a tragic American story. And it's a story that makes Diddy not so much an outlier in this country, but he's basically a blueprint. He's mirroring the American experience in real time here in 2025, because this is America. Media, money, manipulation, and mass amnesia. We forget how horrible people are sometimes because they're entertaining us and they're making money, and they're the projections of the wealth that we want to attach ourselves to as Americans. And that is, again, the narcissism that is baked into the American cake. We measure our worth by how much money we make. That is the American experiment. That is the narcissistic nation at play. And it falls into everything that I've been talking about in our last few episodes, where we as a country seem to want to put people who are complete derelicts and just some of the worst people, we want to attach ourselves to them and actually say that they're worthy of being put on Mount Rushmores. I'm speaking in terms of what we're seeing in today's modern discourse, when you have an entire half of the generation completely rallying behind a man who, for instance, was convicted of an actual federal crime, yet still was able to garner a significant amount of the popular vote and the electoral college, put it into office. And now we're seeing the residual effects of what this gangster type of modus operandi can get us to. That is another episode for another day, and we'll talk about that orange guy some other time. But today I want to talk about how the verdict in Diddy's case, it is something that really speaks to the narcissistic opium of American power, and how money can corrupt us to the point where we're here splitting hairs and celebrating the fact that a man is only going to do 20 years for seriously exploiting other people and hurting them. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Enrique. This is Precision Cycle, brought to you by Elevate.epo. Let's open it up. So let's look at the P. Diddy trial, and I'm going to defer my analysis here to the great Bruce Rivers. If you have a chance to visit Bruce Rivers' YouTube page, I highly encourage you, because he is one of the only criminal defense attorneys on YouTube who has been on this from day one, and his explanations of RICO and the various other laws and acts that are being attached here and how the government is prosecuting Diddy is top notch. And you should go and you should check him out, because he does a really good job of explaining the mechanisms that the Department of Justice used to try this case. We saw in the Diddy trial that the defense didn't respond in any way. There was no testimony from the defense, no denial, just silence from the defense point of view. And that pretty much gave a good indicator of what the next pathway was going to be for the jurors. If we continue to look at Bruce Rivers' analysis, we recognize that the jury only needed one or two overt acts, not all of them, to convict in this trial. And that's why they imposed the RICO Act, which is the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is a tactic that the U.S. government put in place to take down the mob back in the 70s and 80s. Most notably, one of the cases, John Gotti being one of the people who was ultimately brought down, the Gambino crime family member and boss, who the government utilized the RICO Act to essentially tie a series of different crimes together. This organization was a corrupt organization and a criminal organization because it had done all these ancillary crimes, which then can roll it up into a major racketeering charge. What that led to, of course, in folklore of mobsters and American history was the Teflon Don was finally taken down. They had gotten one of his right-hand men, Sammy the Bull Gravano, to testify against John Gotti, which was the death blow in his trial. John Gotti ended up going to prison for the rest of his life, dying in prison after having cancer. But we see how RICO is so powerful for the U.S. government because it's not necessary to catch anyone red-handed these days if they're part of a criminal organization. Being able to paint them as an organized structure that sanctions these criminal activities is enough to take down the bosses, leaders at the top. That was the reason why this racketeering component was created. The U.S. government was done trying to take out low-level street pushers and street soldiers. They wanted to go after the people who were actually funding, controlling, and operating at the top. This has been a very effective method that the government has utilized to take down a lot of other organizations throughout history. The U.S. government doesn't mess around when it comes to RICO charges. The government doesn't bring them unless it's certain it's going to win. It has close to a 96% conviction rating. Essentially, the trial is an afterthought. The government already has the goods on you when they bring a RICO trial against you because they're essentially just trying to find other crimes that are going to help them put you away longer for the crimes that they already know they got you for. Because the jury deliberated for such a short time and came back after being given another Allen charge to have further deliberation yesterday. When they came back, they acquitted on the three major charges, which would have had him going to life or prison, but they still found him guilty of the lesser charges, which still are violations of the Mann Act and have major consequences. He's facing 10 years maximum for each of those convictions. Depending on what type of judge he happens to face for sentencing, that could be a maximum, that can be a minimum, that can be somewhere in the middle. But make no mistake, Diddy is going to go to jail. Now, whether or not he's going to suffer in jail, probably not, because he has the means to create a comfortable life, as many other leaders of these corrupt organizations are able to do. He's still a criminal nonetheless, because today the American people have said, you have committed terrible crimes that violate laws that have been on the books for more than 100 years. They passed the Mann Act in 1910. They're still using it in 2025. That tells you that a lot of these white slavery traffic components and laws being broken all the time now. And we continue to see that. Human trafficking is by far an issue that does not get as much real analysis as it deserves. But government didn't need the jury to believe everything. They just needed them to believe something, and they got it. So RICO is the Department of Justice cheat code, not just for the mobs, but for all kinds of corrupt organizations. Hidden behind corporate structures, limited liabilities, incorporations. And again, we go back to the documentary, The Corporation, which lays out the psychopathy of corporate thinking and decision-making and its ultimate purpose in society. Corporations are people, as Mitt Romney said, and because they are people, those people are psychotic and sociopaths. What we saw in the courtroom today was a mixed reaction. We had people who were upset that the government and the jury didn't go far enough. There are people who are celebrating the verdict because it put Sean Combs in a position to receive a lesser sentence. Looking at Bruce Rivers' analysis and then bringing it back to what we're seeing here, we're seeing the power of the state with the power of celebrity. Both are used to silence, seduce, and ultimately suppress people's action. Bad Boy Records itself wasn't a label. It's a cult. essentially. Controlled narratives, private surveillance, loyalty through fear, sex, and blackmail. That was the operating procedure of Bad Boy Records. And that's something that we saw on display and was very evident throughout the trial. Diddy had at some point taken the idea from creating music to using that music and the funding that he got from that to then build this other empire of power and control, and to the end, sexual trafficking. And so when we compare this to what Trump did with Jeffrey Epstein, having NDAs and settlements for actions he clearly knows he took against minors. There's a reason why the Jeffrey Epstein files have not been released. There's a reason why Elon Musk keeps teasing them, and there's still mystery behind all these actions, especially when we're seeing people making decisions to start wars when people are asking for the release of these documents and are threatening to do so. We're talking about Netanyahu in many ways, because we're talking about the corruption and the religious justification then to cover up covert acts of narcissism. These men in powerful positions, and again, the jury is still out and we don't want to make any assumptions, but where there's smoke, there's fire. In clinical work, when people start to over-explain and when people start to project, that's pretty much a dead giveaway that they are trying to get something off their conscience. We call that projective identity. If you look at Donald Trump, if you look at Bibi Netanyahu, everything that they talk about is projective identity. They are trying to cast other people with that same sort of innate ugliness, narcissism that lives inside of them. Elon Musk, again, another example, NDAs for workplace harassment that are very evident in news circles. Plus, he has these Iron Man delusions where he believes he's able to be a Tony Stark type and create technology, and that makes him above reproach when it comes to his abuse of coworkers and potentially women. And this has been something that has been created from that cult of personality, the cult of celebrity, manufactured consent through having clout, getting likes, record sales, Tesla sales, having your golf course attended by really rich folk. That seems to be the metric, as opposed to, hey, are you just a genuinely good person that doesn't hurt people? That doesn't have any real place in America these days, especially if you're trying to make money and make a name for yourself. The same pathology shows up throughout these organizations, whether it's Bad Boy, the Trump organization, Bibi Netanyahu and the IDF, Elon Musk over Tesla or X. Delusions of grandeur, narcissistic entitlements, and coercive control. That is the playbook, again, that has been the reward that America has established for sociopaths. America rewards sociopathy when it wears a smile, throws parties, and sells products. And that is pretty much the American way through and through. So let's look at the empire of the Freakoff, right? Over 1,000 bottles of baby oil, male hookers, multi-state trafficking, $46,000 worth of hotel damages per session, right? This is industrialized perversion. This was a well-oiled machine that rolled into town, had this entire operation set into motion, complete with assistants, complete with other types of production personnel that would create these giant freak-offs and leave violence on innocent people who rightfully thought that Diddy was interested in helping them further their career. This was corporate level sexual terrorism, branded, monetized, and hidden behind hit records. This was in many ways the opium den of America with an HR department, right? This is the corporate aspects of being able to mass produce abuse on a grand scale, which is not unlike the American government. The real issue here isn't so much Diddy as how narcissism metastasizes itself when left unchecked. The public became the enablers for Diddy's crime and his wave of terror over people. We clapped, we streamed, we reposted, and we looked away all the while people were being turned into human props and destroyed. Diddy is a tragic inevitability in a system that teaches boys to perform dominance and hides girls behind PR. And so we've normalized freak-offs because they're normalized narcissism. Remember my time at residential when I worked with a victim of human trafficking who would sit with me and discuss how the person who would come in and utilize the services that was exploiting this woman sometimes was coming in under the color of authority. They would come in wearing uniforms, and for people we ordinarily look at in society as people who are here to protect us. In these situations, we're here to commit atrocities against minors in the same types of narcissistic acts that Diddy has put on display and normalized. And just think about how sick this world has gotten. Aaron Katursky from ABC News is reporting from a Manhattan courthouse and discussing details relating to people called the Punisher and explaining these graphic sex scenes to David Muir on the nightly news. That is how disgusting and deranged our society has gotten, to the point where we have normalized this type of behavior. And we're actually sitting here and having debates about it. It's not so bad. Consensually, they can agree to be exploited. No, it is bad. The jury had just told you he trafficked them across state lines to have them prostituted. That is a crime. Diddy is no different from any other sort of criminal pimp that's out in the street. He just has the money to cover it up and a PR group to say, yeah, it's not so bad. It is that bad. And when you have family members in the courtroom cheering the fact that they found you guilty of a crime, even though it's a lesser crime, that's sick. That's disgusting. That's people who have lost their way from a moral standpoint, never really had morals outside of how do we maximize exploitation so that we can reap as much benefit as possible. That's really what that court scene was telling you. And so what Diddy's really been showing us is that we have people with very limited ego strengths promoted in this system because they're able to exploit certain elements of capitalism and achieve great heights. But at the same time, for some reason, as a country, we allow these same people to utilize that as some cachet to be able to infringe upon other folk and violate other people's civil rights criminally, as we see now. This isn't about cancel culture. This is about clarity culture. And this is the problem with the way American society has shifted itself these days into this mass production of clout. If you still think this is about music, then you're not ready for adulthood. That's really what this is telling us. And you don't have the ego strength to understand that we are living in a society that has weaponized delusion at a grand scale. This is the American dream turned demonic. Greed, sex, and delusion. Weaponize that scale so that it can then exploit as much as possible and really not give a shit about the people that it exploits. Those women who are trafficked are never going to be made whole again. They're never going to have that part of their life back. My ex-client will never understand what it's like to not be sold into sexual slavery. Will never understand what it's like to not be abused by people under the color of authority. And this is the American dream. We've gone from manufacturing cars to manufacturing narcissism at a grand scale, with this being the end result. R. Kelly should have been the canary in the coal mine to let us know that Hollywood, music industry, the things that prop us up and keep us sedated are the very things that were keeping the Romans sedated when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, are the very things that are keeping us sedated as we continue this slow decline of the American experience. And we're seeing the fall and the crumble of an American empire. How did we get from Diddy all the way to this is the fall of an empire? Look at, we're normalizing putting men who are consistently narcissistic, who are some of the worst examples of humanity, and we put them in positions of power and we worship them. Some people do. That tells you there's a lack of thought processing and any type of real ego strength development in people, that they can't see through party lines of just their own personal narcissistic interests and look at the person in front of them and say, yeah, you're somebody who shouldn't be in any position of power because you are an abuser and you actually may have abused people who were some of the most vulnerable in our society. And so this should be a wake-up call, right? When people tell you who they are, you should believe them. When people tell you that they've used lots of NDAs to make sure that their victims don't talk, that should tell you something. That should tell you that we probably shouldn't vote them in, because then we have the outcome that we continue to see in this country. We need to start recognizing the patterns here, because in this narcissism nation that we live in, we protect people who have the means to be protected, and we completely discard the people who don't. The real RICO charge here, it isn't against Diddy, it's against us for letting these freakoffs pass as leadership. That's really who the RICO charge should be put against. The American public, who continues to buy into celebrity culture and continues to let these people have free reign over a society that is going to shit. There's no celebrating any of this. Diddy didn't win anything. The government didn't win anything. What we proved was that people are allowed to be the worst versions of themselves as long as they keep making money. As long as the banger hits, boom, you're good. That's the message here. And the more we continue to go down this route, the more we pass that Rubicon. We're getting to the point where Caligula ends up appointing a horse to the Senate. Truly, this is not as ridiculous as it sounds. Look at half of the appointments that have been made to the U.S. cabinet. People who have absolutely no business being anywhere near leadership let alone a cabinet position, someone who is completely deranged and has no actual clue as to what he's doing from an American perspective. He's just simply the guy that the American Heritage Foundation and the Project for a New American Century and all these other black money groups have used as the lightning rod unifying point for their sick and twisted anti-American agenda. The people who are in Washington are anti-American. The people who fund these people in Congress, who fund these politicians who are putting money in their pocket, they are un-American. Peter Thiel, he is un-American because he doesn't have an American interest in mind. He only cares about himself. And that's where this country's going to. Because again, Narcissism Nation, we're in it for ourselves. That may be a good thing because it allows people to go out there and create wealth. But it's also a bad thing, as we're seeing here, because it lets people get away with some of the worst atrocities known to man. And you could sit here and you could talk about how pedophilia is bad. The guy you voted for may potentially be one. And that's not me saying something out of pocket. There's actual evidence. Go and do the research. These people were on Epstein Island. These people were very prominent in that world. And I don't care if you want to bring up other people on the left, bring them up. Bill Clinton absolutely was there. So this is what we have to face as in America. Do we continue to put our stock and faith into these really grotesque older boomers and men have a knack for exploitation? Or do we want to start building coalitions around people who actually have the American people in mind? Honest Americans that go out every day, work, pay their taxes, put their children in schools, try to do as much as they can to make sure that they are abiding by the rules. Who do we want to really make this country for? We want to make this country for people who are going to make all kinds of money, then turn around and use that money to hide themselves when they go and they break laws? Or do we want to help the people who are struggling to reach that American dream, if the American dream even exists? Today's news cycle changed our production a little bit here at Precision Cycle, but I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk about the Diddy ruling in its broader context, because I think it's important to understand that Diddy is just a microcosm of America. As Diddy goes in this trial, America goes. And we're going to see the point where narcissism becomes the 100% natural leaning towards somebody in some Trump 2.0 version that comes on down the line that really starts to take away people's freedoms under the color of authority. That is not to create anxiety in people, but the reality is that today's ruling tells us that certain type of people can commit atrocities and not have to be held to any type of ego strength until the maximum force of government comes in and tells them, no, you actually have to stop. Until there is those hard boundaries, people will never get there on their own. That is where we need to come together as a society and understand what is the boundaries. What are we willing to tolerate? Because the only way to beat a narcissist is with boundaries, whether that's at P. Diddy's level, the presidential level, or within your own relationship. If you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you continue to be abused and dehumanized, boundaries are the only thing that can get you out and protect you. Just like that person I worked with at residential was able to learn boundaries and create a life for themselves that is qualitatively better. Same thing Americans are going to have to do. How do we tolerate that? Is it by boycotting? Is it by not supporting certain brands? Maybe that's a boundary. But it's also, what are we willing to tolerate? What are we willing to sit with? Are we okay with the fact that someone just brought all kinds of disgusting sexual graphic details to federal courthouses? This is the thing that we have to put our children through, and other folk that they're just trying to make a living for themselves, and now they're having to navigate this clear violation of narcissistic intent. Is this okay? Is this what we want to teach our children? I probably don't think so. Thank you very much for joining me today on another Precision Cycle. My name is Enrique Arteaga. You can reach me at elevateepo.com, Enrique at elevateepo.com. Also Precision Cycle TV on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and X. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in and continues to tune in. And thank you to the people who responded on my last podcast. If you did send me fan mail via the podcast, please feel free to write me an email or contact me in DM. I will honor that free session and we will go from there. I am unable to respond to those fan mails directly, so please feel free to email me directly and I will honor that session to whoever that person in Washington, Arizona, and California. Just send me an email and I will make an appointment for you. I'll be back on Friday, 4th of July. We will have another Precision Cycle. Tomorrow, please watch for a BTS. And I also want to thank everyone for the views that we were able to get across all of our networks in June. 2025. We exploded for a plus 328% view rate in June. Thank you very much to everyone who has engaged with our content, finds value in the things that we are presenting here at Precision Cycle. We greatly appreciate it, and we thank you very much. And we hope that this is only the beginning and we continue to grow and bring you the type of content that will cut through some of the noise of the media and apply a psychodynamic lens to this analysis. This has been, again, a presentation on narcissism and how it's baked into the cake. We see here another example of how narcissism has corrupted an organization, and now we're seeing the end results of that. Thank you very much. My name is Enrique. I'll be back tomorrow for a BTS and on Friday for another episode of Precision Cycle. Until then, take care.